Ambassador Annika Peterson, Consul General of Brazil in New York. Ministra Lucia Maria Maeda, Deputy Consul General of Brazil in New York. Board members of the Chamber, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome. On behalf of the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to welcome you to the Brazilian Summit. Summit is a long-standing tradition of the Chamber, always occurs immediately following the mid-year meetings of the IMF and World Bank to take advantage of the presence of ministers and other Brazilian government officials. As you'll see from the agenda, we've been able to bring together distinguished speakers from Brazil, also the New York community, that will hopefully add to our understanding of the current situation in the country. I'd like to quickly note that this is my first event as the newly appointed Executive Director of the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce. I've been involved in the Chamber in various capacities for the past 17 years, and I believe the Chamber provides a vital role in developing the understanding between our two nations. So for me, it's an honor and a privilege to be the Executive Director and to support and continue with the vital mission of the Chamber. This year, our conference chairperson will be Gabrielle Trebat of McLarty Associates, who have long been an important contributor to the Chamber. She will lead the conference, so without further ado, I will turn it over to Gabrielle.
Thank you, Ted. As Ted mentioned, I'm Gabrielle Trebat, Director for Brazil and Southern Cone at McLarty Associates, and it's a pleasure to be once again chairing this very important event. I'd also like to take a quick moment to actually congratulate Ted on his new position at the BACC. You're a longtime friend, Ted, of both Brazil and the United States, and I can't think of a better person right now to be leading the programming here at the BACC at this time. The Brazil Summit, as you know, is an annual event and one that many of us look forward to every year. Despite the unprecedented times in Brazil, and indeed both in Brazil and the United States, there are many opportunities that are rapidly coming online. Challenges remain, but many of us are seeing encouraging signs as Brazil emerges from the long recession. Inflation is down. Brazil is tackling some very important fiscal, labor, tax, and regulatory reforms, as well as initiating changes to facilitate infrastructure investment that we expect will have a lasting and positive impact on the investment environment. We will hear more from our speakers today on these topics and other mid to long-term opportunities, and of course, we'll have a frank discussion on the more challenging and hopefully short-term economic and political realities. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Ambassador Annika Peterson. I guess one quick minor note, for those of you in need of translation equipment, you will find the headsets on your table. Channel 1 is in English, Channel 2 is in Portuguese. Ambassador Annika Peterson has been Consul General of Brazil in New York since December 2013. Since beginning her distinguished diplomatic career in 1978, she has served in various positions in Brazil and abroad, including the Brazilian Embassy in Washington, Budapest, Asuncion, and Montevideo. She served as a member of the Permanent Mission of Brazil in Geneva and headed the Embassy of Brazil in Angola. Ambassador Cabral, we're delighted you can join us. I'd like to invite you now to make a few welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Today. Good morning. Sorry. And, okay, just a second. An event that for more than 10 years has brought together government and private sector with the aim of strengthening Brazil-U.S. economic relations. In that sense, I want to thank the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce for the continued efforts to raise awareness about the many business opportunities in Brazil. As in previous editions, today we are going to have insights from analysts, professionals deeply involved with the Brazil economic reality. Brazil is a complex society and facing multiple crises, political, moral, social. But our current economic outlook is brighter than forecast a few months ago. So the good news is that our economy is slowly reacting and achieving better rates. Of course, regardless of this scenario, you cannot forget that Brazil is a global performer and has participated in most events of the international scene since its independence. It's a country of continental dimensions, one of the major economies of the world, one of the 50th largest population. We have a diversified economy, state-of-the-art agriculture, world-class industries. Besides that, a dynamic market for computers, automobiles, cell phones, refrigerators, medicine, cosmetics, etc. Our scenario shows we need new economic projects and plans. President Temer's administration has been laying the groundwork for sustainable growth through a reform agenda designed to make a more efficient state and a more competitive economy. streamlining the pension system, tamping down inflation, creating a reliable business environment, inviting foreign investors, and restoring consumer confidence. As everybody knows, it's quite a challenge to transform a country from underdeveloped into a progressive nation, and very little countries have done so. So let's hope the crisis will also be a turning point and bring new opportunities to Brazil. For the right perspectives and solutions, let's hear the ideas of the professionals that are going to talk here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Cabral. I would now like to introduce Dr. Joaquim Levy, Managing Director and Chief Financial Officer of the World Bank Group, where he has responsibility for the financial and risk management strategies of the World Bank Group and its institutions. Just over a year at the World Bank, Dr. Levy has made already an impact, successfully mobilizing new sources of financing to help support the arm of the bank that works with the poorest countries. Prior to joining the World Bank Group in February 2016, Dr. Levy was Minister of Finance of Brazil, where he launched an important series of reforms that have helped to catalyze Brazil towards its return to fiscal sustainability. From 2010 to 2014, he was CEO of Bradesco Asset Management. He has also served as Secretary of Finance for the state of Rio de Janeiro, and prior to that, Secretary of Brazil's National Treasury. He served as previously also as well as Chief Economist at the Brazilian Ministry of Planning, Budget, and Management. Dr. Levy, we are very honored to have you join us. We look forward to hearing your presentation. If I can make a quick note too, you will find note cards on your table with some pencils. If you have any questions during the presentation, please jot them down, and a member of the BACC staff will collect them, and hopefully we'll have time to filter through a few of them at the end of his presentation.
Thank you, thank you. It's very good to be here. It's so good to see some familiar faces, Professor Fischlow, our friends from Brain. This is such an important outfit to promote Brazil and the awareness of Brazil and integration within South America and Latin America, and many others. I think Marcelo Esteban is around here, long-time friend. So I think like our Ambassador Consul General here mentioned, it's a time where we start to see some recovery, and all of us are confident that tomorrow will be better than today, and we'll be in a path really for growth and to fulfill our aspirations. Let me first start to say a couple of words about the spring meetings of the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank and IMF, that have just finished. It was a very productive meeting. I think that one thing that was special was, especially in the side of the World Bank, great recognition of the importance of issues about differences in income and inequality in general. Not only inequality across countries, but inequality within countries. And then, of course, the connection with trade. I think that if you look at the world today and say 20 or 50 years ago, inequality, especially across countries, has declined dramatically. You never saw such a convergence of income around the world. Inequality within countries have in some cases increased, in some cases decreased. Most of the cases it's not related to trade, it's related either to internal policies or technological changes. There are major challenges in the new, say, industrial revolution, with all the question it raises about jobs as 200 years ago, and what will be the policy responses for that. But generally, as you all know, the economy, global economy, is doing a little bit better than it was doing in the past. I mean, the general, perhaps, joke was that the first time in many, many years we had the institutions changing their forecasts upwards and not downwards. And that's good news. And of course, yesterday's vote in France also gave some buoyancy to markets. So that's what we saw, of course, themes like the voice of developed countries continue to be heard. The mention that was made to IDA, the fact that now IDA, which is the World Bank arm to poor countries, are going to have access to market, and with this increased by 50% its ability to support programs in the poorest countries in the world. It was also very important, and again, it's a theme that is highly related to what we're going to discuss, which is how we mobilize private sector money to do the things that the world needs, and in particular, investment in infrastructure. So I would like to thank Pablo for the opportunity to share some thoughts, and especially thoughts about what the World Bank sees as very crucial for the world in coming years, and how this connects with Brazil. I have to say, I cannot say much because I'm a little conflicted given my original role back in 2015, but I would say that especially at the federal level, relationship between the World Bank and the Brazil government have not been so intense for many, many years, with a great, say, dialogue in terms of how we can support policy changes, and also in particular in capital markets, how we can help fostering the development of infrastructure, investments in infrastructure. What this chart says that, of course, we have big challenges in the future. This is why I have this little beautiful thing on my chest, which is the symbol of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which is what we want to achieve by 2030. And for doing that, we have to invest much more, because we have more people, there will be more demand for food, for water, for all of that. And this requires a great upgrade in terms of investment. The box in the bottom shows how investment in infrastructure is today. It is the bottom part. We are talking about $1 trillion or something like this, $1.5 trillion. And we see what is private run, which is the blue part, and then what is financed by MDBs. And it's always a reminder that we do a lot of things, but we're a small part of the figure. And also show that if to fill the upper part of this, we'll need to mobilize private finance in a scale that has never been done, because public budgets will not be able, of course, to fill the upper part, especially the greening of infrastructure that is so fundamental. And also affordable, because, of course, if you're going to build new infrastructure today, you better do in the right way and thinking about sustainability. Now, in principle, there is a lot of money around. Here we have a chart with the main institutional investors. You look at sovereign wealth fund, you're talking about $7 trillion. So this gives a sense of the size of it. This is several times the GDP of Brazil. Okay, the GDP of Brazil is probably 1.5 or 2 trillion these days, I believe. So this gives an idea where we are. Then you think about insurance companies. We're talking about 23 trillion, okay, and 26 trillion. Well, of course, when you think about the demands, it's still, if you were to fulfill this with the private sector, pretty soon you're talking about 5 or 10% of this portfolio, which, for those who are used with the asset management, it's not a small part. It's a quite large part of any portfolio. But anyway, there is scope, and given that usually we're talking about 100 or 150 billion a year of PPPs and other finance of this type, there is plenty of room. And this is timely, because the fact is that the return on capital has fallen dramatic. Profits have gone up, but the return of capital, when you think in terms of capital as a factor that you're renting, like labor, you see that the returns keep falling and falling and falling. Firms are keeping a lot of, sometimes distributing, but actually keeping a lot of these profits, sometimes not investing, and this is why you have all this cash, by the way. But when you think what the returns, for instance, that pension funds can have, they keep falling and falling. It's a bit of a puzzle. This comes from a very interesting PhD thesis now from a candidate from Chicago, that Sigma Barkey, who works with González, it's a name that some of you are familiar, that shows this trend. But that means that when you look at most of the pension funds, for instance, OECD countries, you see that they will need to have a return of 5% to be really sustainable given the liabilities that they have in the future. They don't get 5% these days. They get much less than that. So you have to increase the opportunity, the investment opportunities for most institutional investors, and that includes insurance companies, pension funds, etc. So what we have to do, and this is what all MDBs are mobilized. I have here my friend from IDB who hosted a fantastic forum about global infrastructure on Saturday under President Moreno. So we all together, AIDB, EIB, etc., knowing that we have an opportunity to increase the returns that a lot of institutional investors get. And it does make sense if you think about the big picture. You have a lot of savings in demographies of old populations. If you can find ways to channel this for productive investment in countries with a young demographic, that means that you're going to create an income flow for these aging societies that actually appear not to need so much capital. A lot of the new, most dynamic sectors in the advanced economies don't need that much capital. And actually, something that one of the reasons why the rental value of capital has declined is because the demand in these countries, in part because of demographics, in part because of technological change, is declining. So, but there is such an enormous demand in developing countries. So the thing is how we can connect the supply of funds with the demand for funds in countries. Well, the first thing is to see if there are projects around. We did some studies. We looked at a number of data banks and then talked with all our offices around the globe. And we found out that today, in terms of investment programs that governments and others have put forward, we have about $1 trillion of potentiality. It's very interesting that a large part of this is in Latin America, and actually Brazil does account for a significant part of these possibilities. Now, our role is not only to identify, but also help to make these possibilities more bankable, more ready for get investments, and so that we can really transform this pipeline, potential pipeline today, in real opportunities for real investments in relatively short period of time. It's very significant. It's actually it's $930 billion. And for that, we are mobilizing a number of instruments. It's very interesting because, of course, out of these projects, part will be equity, but also you have to rely in fixed income. And this is why we've been working with Morningstar, which is an index provider, to really create the first ever index for global emerging markets infrastructure debt. And we've been working for some months. They have a general global index for infrastructure, and we are taking the emerging markets part. And what you see when you look at this index is actually if you have a portfolio of emerging markets infrastructure, which is the pink or red box, it's pretty well situated. You see that in terms of, I made up this frontier, but I think given that there's nothing above it, you can call it a frontier, okay? You see that you have less risk than other possibilities, but higher return than, say, just outright bonds. This is a portfolio of investment-grade corporate bonds in the infrastructure sector. It's a very good benchmark for other bonds that are not that much tradable. These, of course, are highly tradable bonds, but this helps for any asset managers, those who manage these trillions that we're talking about, to start to have a sense of what to expect from this asset class. Kaká is here from many years in Banco do Brasil. He knows that if you don't have a benchmark, it's like this philosophical thing. If you don't have a name, the thing doesn't exist. For an asset manager, if you don't have a benchmark, the class doesn't exist. So the first thing you have to do is to get something that you can make the class comparable with other things. Then there are a lot of other things that we can do. And here you have, hosted at the World Bank, but with the participation of other MDBs, what is called the Global Infrastructure Facility. And this facility has two main activities. From one side, they want to make this $1 trillion really bankable. So you help in project preparation, in really giving transparency. You have a number of things that at some time we can discuss. And we help countries. We're helping Argentina, Egypt, Indonesia on how you prepare not only specific projects, sometimes big projects like in Tunisia, linking with an electrical cable to Italy so they can buy electricity and sell electricity, but also programs. How you put a program that is easy for investors to understand, it's easy for investors to get into. And this is what we're doing in Argentina and Indonesia. Recently in Argentina, mind you, the World Bank gave a $400 million guarantee to support bids, electricity auctions for renewables. So basically you say the government is the off-taker, and if there's any problem, we'll pay whoever is providing the energy for a few months. Well, with this we mobilized $2.5 billion in investments. So this shows how we can leverage some of the money that you put in guarantees and other instruments. And this is why you have the other side, which is the downstream window, which provides these instruments so that you can use these opportunities. I jumped these. We have many, some of you are very familiar with the products that we have, exactly with one strategy, is that we don't want just to be lenders. We want to be facilitators between countries and investors. So we are this matchmaker between supply and demand. This is why we're developing these new products in guarantees, and some do exist, some we're completing. And also giving advice, because it's twofold. You have to reduce the intrinsic risk of the projects, and you have to give these bridges, these financial bridges. You cannot just do through financial solutions to solve problems that are. But you can also do something very important, how you share the risk between the company, the government, and investors. A typical example is, for instance, exchange rate risk. One good way of doing this is if the company has their fees, their tolls linked to inflation, okay, you give a sort of facility where if there's an exchange rate shock, we provide liquidity, but then we know that the tariffs will be adjusted over time. So we lend money so that the bondholder is not affected, and then the company little by little repay us. This type of things where we spread the risk, you manage the risk adequately is what you have to do. But countries also have to work. They have to improve their business environment. Now here I know that it's not a hostile audience to this type of discussions, I hope. But we have a lot to do. This shows where we were in terms of distance to the frontier, and the highest we're closer to the frontier, where we were in 2012 and where we are now. Well, we are behind a lot of countries, because the more you go to the right, the better you are. And you see that Brazil is really not in the first group, right? It's not first division there. And moreover, since 2012, we have not moved that much either. In spite of all the work of brain, we have to be a work of a private sector with the government and sometimes with the help of multilaterals. You see, Indonesia is not only ahead of us, but has moved in these intervening years. Even Rwanda and Colombia has not moved because it has actually moved before 2012. So there's a lot to do, and I'm very happy and encouraged because the government is now working very closely. They have put great people at the Ministry of Finance to move with this agenda, and I'm sure that we're going to get good results and really move to the northeast of this chart, I hope, in a short period of time. That's the way to go. Now, let me, in this sense, it's more of a diversion, but it's that things change sometimes from where you least expect. Now, what this picture shows is that one of the most, controversial things in the U.S. for many, many years was what's called the spoils system. Actually, New York was a great example. For many years, people thought that positions in government were something to be traded for political support. Okay, the government is a place, okay, you do good, but you have to have something to grease the machinery. And this was, at the time, this was launched by a president that changed the way things were done. Never before in the human history had a president like Andrew Jackson. And he followed very intellectual presidents that have created a wonderful place, but was too elitist. So the elite was really shocked when Jackson came. And Jackson came with this idea that, well, making the government porous to people and new people that you bring is okay. And then one of his supporters, which is this fellow, the second fellow, which is Senator William Macy, had this wonderful sentence, which is, to the victors belong the spoils, okay? Which in Portuguese, I think was translated later by Machado de Assis, o vencedor as batatas. So it's not really totally his invention, his humanitarist thing. But, and then there was a president, President Garfield, who was shot. And can you imagine why? By whom? By a guy who thought he deserved a job. Okay, so it was someone really from the machinery, from the way it worked, that killed the president. And then you get Chester Arthur, who was a guy who was all his life involved with this kind of thing. He was a big head of a Republican machinery here, I think in New York, but he decided that he would change things. He would clean up that. Government is not to be, say, divided this way. Public service is something that has to be professional, clean, transparent. And with the help with the Senator Pennington from Ohio, which actually happened to be also a guy full of flaws. He was, he had support slavery, a number of things, but was an honest guy in a way. They had this great reform, which is the Public Service Act of 1883, which started to change the way the United States worked. It brought transparency, it brought merit, and it really created this first-class administration that has helped the U.S. for more than a century. And it's not only in the 19th century this happened. If you remember that back in the 70s, there was the Lockheed scandal that led President Carter to transform the way and pass the act that forbade American companies to pay bribes either in the U.S. or in any place of the world. And for that's 40 years of that. And for the last 40 years, Boeing and so many companies, you saw the transformation of China with this law, which shows that unexpected things from unexpected persons can lead to major and positive and long-lasting changes. So I think this, of course, is just a digression that may or may not have some interest for some of you, but I think it's always something we could think about and gives some hope that we can find new and constructive ways. Very clearly, and I'm out in 2 minutes, so I have to finish now. There is no doubt that the infrastructure is the way to the future. There is the money, there is the need. We have to find the way. I think that, of course, with some new thinking in terms of fiscal policies and so on that will yield results for some time. You don't should look only at the short term. I think that we are creating these, and especially if monetary policy allow us to have lower interest rates, that could be really transformational because will make us less dependent from public financing, and it will allow more competition for private financing. And I think that this is what we're seeing happening. Not only the central bank is bringing rates down, which will help to democratize credit, but we also see a decision by, for instance, BNDES to ensure the convergence of government rates to something that you create a level playing field. And at this time, we have to be ready. At this time, we have to have the right instrument to support private investment in infrastructure. And actually, we, the World Bank, are working exactly with these, with BNDES and other players in Brazil, to provide guarantee systems based in the market, but that would allow, when you issue, for instance, a debênture de infraestrutura, a project bond, to have certain guarantees that you allow institutional investors to come in. Because institutional investors are a very sensitive crowd. There are things they can do and there are things they cannot do. And that if you don't provide the adequate vehicle for both domestic as well as foreign institutional investors, it would be very hard to mobilize these money. So I think that with a good macro, the improvement in the doing business indexes, lowering interest rate, as you see, we moving, and adequate instruments, we could have a really big drawing in of capital from the private sector and institutional investors. Final thing, just a comment. Back in 2013, we launched, when I was in the private sector, the first investment fund for debentures infrastructure. It is still there. Other countries, other companies, including Banco do Brasil, Votorantim, but even XP and the others, have launched it. And it's very interesting because the demand continues to exist. They have yielded good return above N10B, even with all the shocks in the sector. So it's very clear that there is a market there. We just have to get the right policy instruments to achieve our objectives. Again, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be able to address such an important, diverse, and vibrant audience. Thank you.